We're live, baby. Hey, YouTube. Down here. And the ABC.
Which must be heard and acted on. I want to see a system where Aboriginal people are
It's going to close the
what?
From Victoria, Professor Frank Overclaim, AM.
Intervened early could be managed more effectively. We need to focus on the health and development of all children. Healthy children grow up to be healthy.
From New South Wales, Theresa Plain. And to care is love in action. It's a journey of hope and trust. Seeing the invisible and doing the impossible. I wrote those words 42 years ago. And it's the same today.
Sorry.
From the Northern Territory, Vernon
Have a light on, Moses. Huh?
The lights on.
What do you reckon? On or off?
Yeah, leave it on.
Continue our culture. Our to be great leaders. Continue.
What an inspiring human beings. Congratulations to all the nominees for Senior Australia of the Year. I was celebrating with a friend recently and I quoted George Burns in saying, "You can't keep getting older." George Burns also said, "Don't stay in bed unless you make money in bed." But I think the first quote is more appropriate. Now, without further ado, Prime Minister, please announce this year's Senior Australian of the Year.
Thanks very much, Susie. Well,
That's friendly. Wait.
Might just need to get back.
Yeah. We'll get back. Alright, we good?
Yeah, please.
For nearly 4 decades, Professor Tom Palmer has put his voice and himself at the gates confronting Indigenous Australians. He worked with others to establish the Aboriginal Task Force at the Darwin Community College, which provided second chance education programs for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. His leadership could translate to the world stage, improving our relations with some of our closest neighbours. He then became a senior advisor to Australian government ministers, a role that would see him sit alongside Australians from all walks of life.
We as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people will be able to, be active participants in our own future instead of being passive recipients of government policies and programs as has happened too much in the past.
Tom became Australia's Race Discrimination Commissioner and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner. His work through this period saw him guide Australia through pivotal conversations about our identity, such as the racism that followed the Cronulla riots and the Bali bombings. Most importantly, the initiation of the Social Justice Report, which was the catalyst for the Close the Gap campaign.
By 2030, we want to have a healthy equality where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people enjoy the same outcomes as non-Indigenous people. And our challenge is really for the rest of the nation to come with us and understand who we are, understand that not only are we the first people, we're the longest surviving, continuing culture in the world.
It was his voice that was selected to be the voice of Indigenous Australia from across the country on the national apology.
Through one direct act, the Parliament has acknowledged the existence and the impacts of past policies and practices of forcibly removing Indigenous children from their families.
His passion for this country and for the marginalised peoples of this country is unwavering to this day. These issues consume his mind like few other Australians. He has now lent his voice to the campaign for the Indigenous Voice to Parliament.
What I try to do is just to keep people informed, to help develop their knowledge, and let people make their own decisions. Many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the nation recognise that is one form of getting a voice.
A man of Tom Calmer's calibre must be celebrated by all Australians for his service to improve the lives of many people around this country.
Prime Minister, Governor-General, members of the National Australia Day Council, fellow finalists, Ngunnawal and Ngambri, traditional owners of this land. It's a privilege and an honour to receive this award that I share with all who have walked and worked with me for decades, with a special acknowledgement of my wife Heather, who has shared my journey. Australia's only ever known a system where Indigenous peoples are treated as problems to be solved, not as partners and active participants in determining their destiny. Australians have only ever known a system of consistent policy failure and poor outcomes for First Nations peoples. This year, we'll have a referendum to consider a First Nations voice in the Constitution. Now, I know a lot about a voice because I've authored and co-authored a number of publications on how it can be done. I believe we must have enduring partnerships so that Indigenous communities can help inform policy and legal decisions that impact their lives, and we can recognise the special place of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia's history. Most recently, attitudes to reconciliation showed 95% of Australian voters believed it is important for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to have a say in matters that affect us. And 81% of Australians believed it is important to protect an Indigenous body within the Constitution. As Senior Australian of the Year and a member of the Council of Elders for Aged Care, I want to particularly address senior Australians because you are the demographic being targeted with misinformation by pundits who are either ill-informed or who have malicious intent regarding the voice. A voice is symbolic as it includes all of our First Nations in the foundation document of our country. It addresses the injustice of their past exclusion and provides healing for the future. A voice is reasonable because without a formal process to provide advice to the Parliament or government, policies are too often made for First Nations peoples rather than with us. What Australians will be asked to vote on in the referendum is the principle of whether there should be a voice. It will be for the Parliament to determine the details of how it would work through our normal legislative and democratic processes. Enshrinement will mean our fate will no longer be determined by the whims of politics and ever-changing governments. The voice is not about special rights for First Peoples. All Australians will remain equal in the eyes of the law. The 2-year nationwide co-design process proposed that the voice will not deliver programs or funding and does not have a veto power. The voice has no ability to hinder parliamentary processes, introduce laws or legislation, nor change them, and the Parliament will be under no obligation to follow the voice's advice. Some might say we already have 11 First Nations members of Australia's Parliament, but First Nation parliamentarians cannot, nor should they be expected to represent all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices in Australia. They answer to all of their constituents and they are an instrument of their political parties. Surely it is obvious permanent change that is not party politically driven is needed to deliver better outcomes for First Nations peoples and all Australians. To all Australians tonight, I want to say the referendum is not a choice between improving people's lives or amending the Constitution. We can do both, but it will require bipartisanship, all levels of governments working together, and it must involve those most affected, namely Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Here in Australia, we are fortunate to be the home of the oldest continuing surviving cultures in the world. This is something we should be proud of and we should celebrate, as many of us are already doing. Let's do this together, as we did in the 1967 referendum and the Bridge Walks for Reconciliation in 2000. Walk with us, vote yes in the referendum. Thank you.
Huge congrats to the Senior Australian of the Year for 2023, Professor Tom Palmer.
And if, like us, you've been inspired by the incredible stories that you're hearing tonight, then please nominate your 2024 Australians of the Year right now.
Yeah, it can be a family member who makes you proud, or a friend who's making a difference in your community, or a stranger who inspires you / you have a crush on. If you want to nominate, head to australianoftheyear.org.au and suggest an exceptional Aussie who you think deserves the recognition.
I have done what you asked. I've nominated you for the last 3 years. I'm so sorry that it hasn't happened yet.
I think it's a clerical error.
Clearly. Now, the national anthem performed by the ANU Chamber Choir for the first time in a few years. I'm pleased to say that you can join in and sing this to your heart's content. Susie, go your hardest.
Yeah, I will. Thank you to the beautiful voices of the ANU Chamber Choir. Now, in just a moment, we will find out who will be our Australian of the Year for 2023. But first, I'm joined by our Australian of the Year for 2022, the wonderful Dylan Alcott.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Susie.
Dylan Alcott, we are so happy to have you back in this room, not only to thank you for the amazing efforts that you have made throughout this year and all the years of your life, and for the meaningful change that you've created, but because I think everyone can agree an event is just better when Dylan Alcott is in attendance. Am I right?
I'll take that. Thank you. I'm currently a washed up tennis player, and in 3 minutes I'm a washed up Australian of the Year as well. So if you need a third host next year, please let me know.
Okay, I hope you don't take my job, but thank you, Dylan. Now, we know that you've had a massive year. It's been non-stop. I know that it's been a tiring year. I know that you've gone to all efforts to get around this country and to spread the message that is so important to you and to all Australians. I want to know if you've been able to shape the change that you want to see.
Yeah, I've been getting asked this, am I proud of the work that I did? And I really don't think I did that much, right? I really think we did it together. I did the easy part, which is just be myself. Right, because this is why I get out of bed every day, is to change perceptions so all people with disability can make the choice over their own lives, live the lives they deserve to live, just like anybody else. And I didn't need to win Australian of the Year to do that, but I've got to bloody say I'm very grateful that I did. You can hear my voice, it's a bit gravelly than normal because I've just been talking non-stop for a whole year to anyone to listen. But to my friends in the disabled community, to the government, to the media, to corporate Australia, to every single person that comes up, like I'm not exaggerating, every single person I walk past in the street comes up and says congratulations for being Australian of the Year. And what can I do to help disability inclusion? You know, want to do better, want to learn, want to make an effort to make sure that the 4.5 million people like me in this country can just live the lives they deserve to live in whatever they want to do, education, sport, employment, in their dating lives, their social lives. And I'm just so grateful for it, and I'm really proud of the way that everybody in Australia really listened to that lived experience rather than spoke on behalf of people with disability. And, you know, words don't mean much without action, and we've done a lot of talking, and there are just tens of thousands of people with disabilities with such amazing contributions to make. Their voices need to be amplified and heard as well. But it's the biggest night I've ever had in my life. I mean that. Wimbledon was cool, but this is pretty special, and I'm really grateful. And to all the Australian Year nominees, congratulations to the people who have won and who's about to win this award. If you ever need anything, just give me a call, because it is a team effort, and I'm just so grateful for the support that I have been given from every single person in this room, everybody watching right now. I really am. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for entrusting me with what is a massive mantle to represent this country. I'm really grateful for it.
You're a humble man, Dylan Alcott. We're so grateful for everything that you do. We are so looking forward to you having a bit of a rest this year, although I'm sure that you're not going to slow down at all.
Oh, everyone's bloody sick of me. It's great. It's that time with someone else, which is great.
Well, thank you again for everything that you do, the amazing Dylan Alcott. I think it's safe to say that you're probably one of the most loved people in this room, but we are about to meet someone else who you will fall in love with. So here are the nominees for 2023's Australian of the Year.
From Western Australia, Professor Samar Owen.
Many people die in a way and a place that's not reflective of their values or their choices. We need palliative care services to work with the community to deliver a more accessible, affordable and sustainable healthcare system.
From Queensland, William Barton.
Music embraces all cultures of the world. It exists in our DNA. Our ancestors have created a safe space, which is enriched by our singing to the song lines of this landscape. I want to use music to heal, connecting people without prejudice. I want to connect us all to the language of this land.
From South Australia, Taran Brumford.
70% of Australian school children consider body image to be their #1 concern. It's my mission to help every Australian child to move, nourish, respect and enjoy their body, and understand that their bodies are not ornaments in life, but rather the vehicles to their dreams.
From the Northern Territory, Samuel Bush-Glenarsi.
As the chair of Northern Land Council, I was at the 7 region in the Northern Top End, in the NRC region. I had the opportunity of walking the two worlds, the Bala and the Yolngu way, to create change for my people. I want all Indigenous youth to be able to do the same.
From New South Wales, Craig Foster AM.
To tackle racism and truly embrace multiculturalism, every one of us in Australia needs to cross those religious and cultural differences and stand with and speak up for all of our beautiful multicultural communities as though they're our own.
From Tasmania, John Kamara.
We should not be
innocent bystander when it comes to racism and discrimination. I want all Australians to call out behaviors that reinforce beliefs that people of color are not of equal worth.
From Victoria, Dr. Anraj Killen.
Our current healthcare delivery system does not cater to the needs of multicultural communities. We need a healthcare system which take into account religious, spiritual, and traditional values in order to provide holistic care to all Australians.
From the Australian Capital Territory, Olympia Yaga.
We have a small window of opportunity to take decisive climate action. Australia is uniquely placed to lead the world in solving some of our biggest challenges. I am focused on innovations that can be rolled out today that solve problems that are creating an unlivable future.
Well, it is now my enormous pleasure to invite the Prime Minister to announce 2023's Australian of the Year.
Thanks, Hamish. Well, what a remarkable group of Australians. The Australian of the Year for 2023 is Taran Brumfitt.
Best-selling author, award-winning documentary maker, and body image activist, Taran Brumfitt has spent the last decade empowering women around the world. Her documentary, Embrace, tackles the issues of body loathing and her own path to acceptance. A gifted speaker, Taran's message has reached over 200 million people worldwide. Congratulations to the Australian of the Year for 2023, Taran Brumfitt.
It is the most powerful thing I've ever done in my life, is learning to embrace my body. And I want every Australian to feel that joy and that freedom and that sense of adventure and that gratitude. So after I bought into those messages that told me I should look a particular way and that would make me happy again, I trained my body obsessively and I got the body, but I wasn't happy.
When Taran posted her non-traditional before and after photos, it made headline news around the world. And I think it really showed us that women of all different shapes and sizes should be able to love and embrace the bodies that they have.
And what it said to me was it was a global epidemic of body shaming and people hating their bodies, and it needed a bigger solution. I thought, well, I'm a photographer and I love telling stories, so what if I bring those two things together and make a film? Like, how hard could that be? So I started a Kickstarter campaign, and the strapline was embrace the documentary that will create global change.
So I went ahead and watched it and my mind was blown. I was just like, this is what I've been thinking and feeling. I think it just really opened my eyes to trying to fit the beauty standards that are set for not just women now, but for everybody. I thought it was just such a powerful and engaging piece, and I really wanted to understand the impact that it had at a scientific level. We know from the research that the women who had seen Embrace actually had much higher levels of body appreciation, and they've gone on to help other people too. And so there was just this really big ripple effect.
The way that she celebrates her body and what it's able to do, and she talks about it being the vehicle to her dreams, and that resonates and lands with me really beautifully.
The message was so strong and powerful, and I knew that by sharing her story, she would create change.
Now it's so fantastic to see Taran's message being brought into classrooms all around Australia, and I think it's going to have a really huge impact on a lot of kids' lives and on their body image as they grow up.
If we get in early to our kids, we might be able to avoid all these issues and all of these problems that adults are experiencing.
Taran has taught me to not judge people based on what they look like, because the most important thing is how kind they are.
I just like being different. I never want to change. And also I'm still very handsome.
And learn that it's okay to be different. It doesn't matter what you look like. It just matters if they're nice or not. Like if they're nice, It's beautiful, you know?
Taryn's work really has the power to ignite change and to enhance the health and well-being of the young people of today and tomorrow.
It's definitely made a huge impact on us, me accepting who I am and making sure my daughter can instill those same qualities and be confident and comfortable in her own skin and be herself.
I will forever be grateful that there are role models of women like Taryn in the world for my girls to look up to.
Not only have you changed my life and my family's, you changed the lives of thousands of people around the world.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I have to say I'm having a little bit of an out-of-body experience on live TV with all of you looking at me, but I'm going to take a breath because our bodies are amazing when we do, so just so I can articulate my words. We weren't born into the world hating our bodies. This is something the world has taught us. Body shaming is a universal problem, and we have been bullied and shamed into thinking our bodies are the problem. And it's working because 70% of Australian school children consider body image to be their #1 concern. We're facing a paediatric health emergency with rates of suicide, depression, eating disorders, anxiety and steroid use related to body dissatisfaction soaring. We now know that young people with poor body image are 24 times more likely to be depressed and suffer from anxiety. There's so much despair in this nation for children and adults when it comes to what we think and how we feel about our bodies. Australia, it is not our life's purpose to be at war with our body. Collectively, we are facing some of the most challenging environmental, humanitarian and social issues of our time. What if instead of spending our days consumed by hating our bodies, we could invest our time together to solve these challenges? And what if instead of spending their precious time and energy at war with their bodies, our young people were free to become the leaders, big thinkers and game changers the world needs more of right now? It's not our bodies that need to change, it's our perspective. Every adult is a role model to a child, and I'm not here to shame you or make you feel bad. I'm here to ask you to shift the way you think. Little Aussies describe their bodies as strong and energetic and powerful, and they have genuine love for all the things their bodies can do. This gives me hope that we can get in early and block the shame and despair, create body image safe environments for them to learn, live and play in, and let them live their lives as teens and adults with the freedom that comes from embracing your body, not the illnesses that come with hating them. And we know that kids and adolescents who have a high appreciation of their bodies and their body image are less likely to smoke, drink, or struggle with other addictions. And this is not about encouraging obesity. This is not what I do. And this issue not simply about weight or size, it's about the way that we feel about all of ourselves, our skin colour, our height, our age, our gender, our unique selves. And it's learning to move, nourish, respect, and enjoy our bodies, because you can't look after something you don't love. I often say that body image is a complex puzzle, just like a Rubik's Cube. I'm not sure if you've done one lately, but they're really tough to do. This year we have the Embrace Kids Classroom program curriculum for Australian schools and a game-changing documentary, Embrace Kids, which we are providing every school as a free resource. It's the most important film that you and your kids will see this year. Our mission is to reach 1 million school children over the next 3 years. Australia, we have 28,000 days on the planet if we're really lucky, and we're not meant to spend them at war with our bodies. When you take your final breath on this earth, what thoughts will be going through your mind? What will you be thinking about? And no one has ever said to me the size of their bum. If we can embrace that perspective now while we're capable, breathing and able, and have the gratitude for our bodies, we can all access a more joyous, rich and abundant life. There's a lot of work to do, and it starts early, and it starts with us being role models for our kids by creating empowering environments where they can thrive. We're tired of just talking about it. We're tired of the misery and the pain of hating our bodies. My goodness, Australia, we are ready for change for ourselves and the generations to come. I would like to thank the National Australia Day Council, and I'd like to thank the most important people in my life. The real hero in our family is my partner, who's a nurse, Tim, thank you, and our 4 kids, Oliver, Cruz, Michaela and Jacob, to my mum and dad, who I can't even imagine what they're doing right now, my sister Justine, and to the hardest working team in the world, Dr. Zala Yeager, Karen Pole, the Lisas, the Kates, and all of the Embrace team, I thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, your Australian of the Year for 2023, she's running away, Tara Brumford.
I'm not crying, Hamish, you're crying. Now we'd
Been
like
trying
to,
to lie.
we both have been. Now we'd like to invite all of our Australians of the Year back to the stage, and while that's happening, Hamish, tell us what's in store from the ABC tomorrow.
Well, Australia Day coverage kicks off tomorrow morning with the Woogalora morning ceremony at 7:30, followed by the National Citizenship and Flag Raising Ceremony at 9. And then at 6 p.m, there's a special edition of The Drum. At 7:30 p.m, Jeremy Fernandez will host the Australia Day live broadcast.
And if you need more Australian of the Year joy in your life, the show will continue on ABC Local Radio with interviews with tonight's recipients. But now, let's congratulate all the nominees from around the country and give one more huge round of applause for these 4 incredible Australians.
Australia's local hero, Amar Singh.
Young Australian of the Year, Ellen McGill.
Senior Australian of the Year, Professor Tom Calma.
And one more time for our Australian of the Year, Tara Brumford. Thanks to the wonderful band, the ANU Chamber Choir, and the amazing Budjera, as well as everyone behind the scenes who works effortlessly to pronounce their words as I do, but also to run this amazing show. And to you, Hamish McDonald, what a delight.
Thank you, Suze. It's always a pleasure to do this with you. It's been a blast this year. Now to take us out this evening, Budjera and the band with Sweet Disposition. But for now, good night, Australia.
And thank you.
Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. These are the top stories. Inflation has come in higher than expected. Consumer prices are up by 7.8% over the year to December. The cost of travel, power, and building new homes are the drivers of the increase. The higher than expected figure makes another Reserve Bank interest rate hike more likely next month. Indigenous leaders in Alice Springs have welcomed the sweeping measures to address the spiralling crime rate, but say they're frustrated because they've been calling for action for decades. The Territory government has implemented restrictions on alcohol sale times, while the federal government is promising to do more to address the long-term underlying issues of Indigenous disadvantage. A roundtable between the government and dating app companies has been described as productive, but has found no immediate fix to curb online abuse. The meeting examined ways to better protect users after a series of recent attacks on women. Transparency of reporting processes dominated discussions, with calls to share information across apps to improve user safety. More than 120 people have died in Afghanistan in the past 2 weeks because of freezing weather. Temperatures have fallen below minus 30 degrees in what's believed to be the coldest winter in a decade. Aid agencies have suspended operations in recent weeks after the Taliban banned women working for non-governmental organisations. And at the Australian Open, world number 5, Aryna Sabalenka has beaten Croatia's Donna Vekic in straight sets. Sabalenka was victorious 6-3, 6-2 and will now face unseeded Polish player Magda Linette in the semi-finals. Linette caused an upset, beating 13th seed Karolina Pliskova 6-3, 7-5. Taking a look at tomorrow's weather in the capitals, Brisbane, Sydney and Canberra, mostly sunny, increasing sunshine in Melbourne, mostly sunny for Hobart and Adelaide, sunny in Perth and possible thunderstorms for Darwin. We'll have more on our top stories in a moment. Stay with us here on ABC News.
This summer, rely on ABC to be with you.
We have issued an emergency warning.
Download the ABC Listen app to hear your local station or find the radio frequency on the ABC Emergency website. Stay connected with ABC.
I've never been on a date before.
Finding love can be hard.
They're stepping into the world of dating.
You look amazing. You look very nice yourself.
I'll never this forever. Better Date Than Never. Tuesday on ABC and ABC iView. From ancient cloud forests to our wild arid deserts.
This is a truly remarkable legacy that the people of Australia are the custodians of.
Australia's Wild Odyssey. Tuesday 8:30 on ABC TV.
ABC Grandstand Summer of Cricket continues. Live and ad-free as Australia's women take on the rising stars of Pakistan. Catch every ball, every wicket. Grandstand Summer of Cricket on the ABC Listen app.
Tonight, body image activist Taryn Brumford named Australian of the Year at a Canberra ceremony. Concerns another rate rise is on the horizon as inflation data comes in higher than expected. New alcohol restrictions come into effect in Alice Springs, but not everyone is happy about them. And Novak Djokovic takes on Andrei Rublev as Arina Sabalenka and Magdalena Net get through to the women's semis at the Oz Open. Good evening, Andrea Niehoff with ABC News. Body image activist Taryn Brumford has been named the 2023 Australian of the Year. The award ceremony has been held in Canberra tonight. Our reporter Stephanie Boris is there and she joins us now. Steph, what can you tell us about this year's Australian of the Year?
Well, there were 8 finalists for Australian of the Year, but of course there could only be one winner. And tonight it has been announced that Taryn Brumford is the Australian of the Year for 2023. Now, she's from South Australia and she founded what's called the Body Image Movement. Initially, the focus was all about empowering women to love and accept their bodies, and she created a documentary around that. But she's gone on to create further documentaries and write further books, now also focusing on children and encouraging children to accept themselves for who they are. In her acceptance speech tonight, she spoke about body shaming being a universal problem, and she said that it's not our bodies that need to change, it's our perspective. Take a listen to what she had during her acceptance speech tonight.
Australia, it is not our life's purpose to be at war with our body. Collectively, we are facing some of the most challenging environmental, humanitarian and social issues of our time. What if instead of spending our days consumed by hating our bodies, we could invest our time together to solve these challenges? And what if instead of spending their precious time and energy at war with their bodies, our young people were free to become the leaders, big thinkers and game changers the world needs more of right now? It's not our bodies that need to change, it's our perspective.
And Steph, tell us who else was recognised tonight?
So there were 3 other awards handed out tonight, Andrea, one of them being the Local Australian of the Year, the winner being Amar Singh. He founded a charity after being subjected to racial abuse, and what he wanted to do was try and create more tolerance in the community while at the same time also helping others. So his charity actually provides food for people in need, particularly in Western Sydney, but the charity has also helped out during other circumstances as well. The Young Australian of the Year is Awa Maville. Now some people may know him as a Socceroo player, but the reason he got the award tonight was because of a charity he co-founded that really works towards improving the health and education outcomes of refugees. He wasn't actually here tonight, the reason being he's off training overseas in Europe, so his family accepted the award for him tonight. And finally, the Senior Australian of the Year was Tom Calma. He's a human rights and social justices campaigner for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, and he's been doing that for 45 years. So some incredible people that we've learnt about here tonight and that have been awarded. This is the 63rd year that there's been an Australian of the Year, and expect many more of them to come in the years ahead.
Stephanie Boris in Canberra there, thank you. Well, the cost of living crisis just keeps getting worse. Today's inflation figure came in higher than expected. Prices are now rising at their fastest pace since 1990. Annual inflation is now at 7.8%, and economists are tipping yet another interest rate hike by the Reserve Bank next month.
Richard Oliver has never seen construction costs go up this quickly.
I myself built a house in 2022, so I know how expensive it was to do that.
Building costs have surged almost 18% in a year, with steel the latest price spike. In the 12 months to December, consumer prices shot up by 7.8%. In the last quarter, inflation was up 1.9%, driven by rising electricity bills and soaring costs to travel here and overseas. Food went up slightly, however, fruit and vegetable costs did come down after the East Coast floods. The cost of new clothes is also increasing, so some are mending what they have, like Honor Wolf, whose rent just went up.
Obviously, the cost of living is extremely high, especially when it comes to like the bills, rent.
The Treasurer is blaming the war in Ukraine and supply chain disruptions.
Inflation was the defining challenge in our economy in 2022, and it will be a defining challenge in our economy in 2023.
There are signs that the price rises are peaking, but today's numbers even took some economists by surprise. Most are predicting that the Reserve Bank will raise interest rates again next month to curb inflation. A Westpac senior economist thinks the cash rate will go up by another 0.25 percentage point.
While the RBA is going to be raising rates at the next meeting, they'll be starting to give signals that they're willing to pause and consider.
Richard Oliver is worried about how high his mortgage repayments could go.
It's a nerve-wracking market, it's a nerve-wracking time.
A sentiment that is felt by many Australians. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
The funeral of former New South Wales Liberal Senator and Senior Army Officer Jim Molan has taken place in Canberra. Mourners gathered in the chapel at the Royal Military College Duntroon in the national capital this morning. Mr Molan rose to the rank of Major General in the Australian Army before entering politics. An Army pilot and Major Commander, he served in the Solomon Islands and East Timor as the Chief of Operations for coalition forces in Iraq. He died from cancer earlier this month, aged 72. Mr Molan was remembered by family and friends, along with military and political colleagues.
But for all that Jim encountered, he was kind and considerate. Whether you knew Jim or you met him just for the first time, he drew you in immediately with his warm and captivating quality. He was a gentleman, one with an unfailingly courteous manner.
He taught us that we can endure anything, that all challenges in life should be faced head-on, to never compromise what we believe in, to back ourselves always and to fight and stand up for what is right, and almost above all, to care deeply for each other and for this country.
A federal court judge has ordered 2 former staffers of Jackie Lambie to pay legal costs for their failed court case against the Tasmanian senator. In June last year, Robert and Fern Messenger lost their unfair dismissal case. Today, Justice John Snowden ordered they pay almost $95,000 of the Commonwealth's legal costs incurred because of what he called Messenger's unreasonable conduct. That included filing large amounts of irrelevant evidence and an insistence on exploring matters not connected with the allegations. While national attention on Central Australia has been welcomed by community leaders, some are calling the focus on alcohol restrictions a band-aid solution to a complex problem. Stringent new alcohol restrictions have come into effect in Alice Springs to try and break a relentless crime wave. The Prime Minister's visit has been a relief to some, while others fear a return to government control over their lives.
At this town camp in Alice Springs, the reality of new liquor restrictions is sinking in.
I think it's a good idea. So some people can have a break from drinking instead of drinking more every day.
After months of escalating crime and violence, last night a fly-in visit from the Prime Minister and a grog crackdown announced.
These are complex problems and they require a full solution.
As well as immediate bottle shop restrictions, limiting opening hours and capping purchases. There will be a review to see if NT intervention-era liquor bans should be restored 6 months after they ended, with the Territory leader now conceding damage has been done.
I acknowledge that with 6 months of data, we need to do more, and that's why we will continue to work in this space with community.
For some, a Prime Minister arriving with new restrictions for Central Australia had an eerie familiarity. 15 years ago, trucks rolled in with federal police, but without local consultation to try to solve serious social woes on the ground.
What we can only describe as a national emergency.
Alcohol was banned from dozens of communities and welfare payments restricted. Leaders say it left thousands disempowered. The impact still felt across the remote NT, where housing and health remain poor.
I think the whole remote areas are going to be reviewed. I mean, the causes of this go back to the day of the intervention.
A local Aboriginal council says Alice Springs town camps are not supportive of a return to blanket alcohol bans. What these laws did was criminalise Aboriginal people based on where they live, says Tanganyika CEO Walter Shaw. A senior bureaucrat overseeing the review of alcohol bans now has 1 week to advise if they should be reimposed, and communities would then need to apply to opt out. Matt Garrick, ABC News.
A bureaucrat involved in drafting his department's response to the Ombudsman as it investigated Robodebt has conceded he failed to provide full and frank information. Under intense questioning at the Royal Commission, he admitted approving false statements which conflicted with his obligations as a public servant.
The King's Counsel went for the jugular.
So you weren't providing full information, were you?
As Robert Herman tried to defend his former department's defence of Robodebt.
You adopted a course where you were not full and frank with the Ombudsman. Correct? I don't think that was my intention. I didn't ask you what your intention was. I said it's clear that you adopted a course which was not full and frank with the Ombudsman.
Yes. Mr. Herman helped draft a response from the Department of Social Services to the Ombudsman in 2017. The letter falsely claimed Robodebt was operating lawfully and that the department had not changed how it assessed income.
You would accept that making untrue representations in a letter under the hand of a secretary to an ombudsman would very strongly conflict with the obligations on you under the Code of Conduct. Yes. Well, that would be a very strong reason not to do it, wouldn't it? Yes. But you still did.
Robodebt used income data averaged over a year to claim overpayments when welfare benefits are based on fortnightly earnings. The Royal Commission also heard the department running Robodebt disobeyed a direction from the Administrative Appeals Tribunal not to use income averaging when recalculating a challenged debt. The Commission was shown a damning email from the government lawyer saying averaging is open and indeed should be applied.
It's a reference to some cases where AAT1 has sensibly considered them all, so one draws the inference he thought they just weren't sensible.
I know what you're saying there, Commissioner.
The hearings continue. Alexander Lewis, ABC News.
The man accused of killing 2 campers in Victoria's High Country has been ordered to stand trial. Former pilot Greg Lynn today formally pleaded not guilty to the murders of Russell Hill and Carol Clay, but a magistrate ruled the police case against him is strong enough to send to the Supreme Court.
3 years after their mysterious disappearance, the families of Carol Clay and Russell Hill are a step closer to finding out what happened in Victoria's High Country. Greg Lynn, the man charged with murdering the campers and dumping their bodies in remote bushland, will now face a jury in Victoria's highest court. During evidence, prosecutors argued at Lynn's committal hearing that he'd acted with murderous intent, and a theory was aired about a shotgun going off during a campsite struggle, causing Carol Clay's death. Investigators identified Greg Lynn as a person of interest 3 months after the campers went missing. They tracked his movements and collected more than 5,000 secret recordings from his home and 4-wheel drive. Police listening in said Greg Lynn was crying and talking to himself on the day he was arrested. Greg Lynn's legal team didn't call evidence during the committal. His lawyer cast doubt on ballistics and forensics evidence and questioned whether police procedures were properly followed when detectives held the accused for 4 days before he was charged. In court this afternoon, Magistrate Brett Sonnet said there was evidence of sufficient weight to support a conviction and ordered the case be sent to trial. In the dock, Greg Lynn sat calmly and carefully took notes during the committal. When asked to enter a plea to the murder charges, he stood up and said, "Not guilty, Your Honour." Police say their investigations are continuing and they plan to head back to the Mount Hotham area to search for more evidence. Christian Silva, ABC News, Melbourne.
A search spanning from the Gold Coast to Brisbane is underway for a woman missing since yesterday afternoon. Police hold grave concerns for the woman's safety after finding evidence of violence at her home. Police have arrested her 30-year-old son in Brisbane South.
A hard drive full of CCTV footage and a small knife pulled from a lake behind an Eleanor home. But there's no sign of the woman who lives there. 61-year-old Wendy Sleeman is still missing after more than 24 hours and is now at the centre of a high-risk missing persons case.
The homicide are now helping us. We've got grave concerns for her safety.
Police last heard from Miss Sleeman yesterday afternoon when she reported her house had been broken into, the security system disconnected and stolen.
She came home from work and they did some forced entry and she noticed some damage, and within that half an hour of her reporting the crime and the police attending, she's disappeared.
Leaving behind a gruesome crime scene.
So it's clear signs of violence and it's obviously evidence of a fight.
Police are desperately searching for her and a blue Honda Jazz, registration 952AT4.
We've got information to suggest that left around the time the woman went missing.
Late this afternoon, police arrested Miss Lehman's son, 30-year-old Slade Murdoch.
Police believe Mr. Murdoch returned to the area last night to retrieve his white Ford Laser, but it had been seized by police. It's understood he then took a taxi to Inala on Brisbane's south side, where investigators have been focusing their search today.
Police say Miss Sleeman had phoned 000 earlier in the day after her son allegedly turned up at her Gold Coast workplace wearing a mask.
They've had problems for a number of years. She clearly has made efforts to try and help him. And unfortunately, some people have a state of mind where they won't accept help.
Police are asking anyone with information to contact them. Heidi Sheehan, ABC News at Gold Coast.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has reportedly decided to send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine and allow other countries to do the same. Leopard 2s are made in Germany and only Berlin has the authority to approve their export. Pressure has been building on the German government, with Ukraine saying modern battle tanks could be the key to winning its war with Russia. The decision is expected to be made official later today, which would mark the first time German tanks will be used on a battlefield in Europe since the Second World War. Police in California say they're still trying to establish motives for 2 mass shootings that killed 18 people in 3 days. The second shooting near San Francisco, resulting in 7 deaths, is believed to be an instance of workplace violence, but investigations are ongoing. The US has recorded 39 mass shootings this month, more than any other January on record. US President Joe Biden has weighed in on the latest violence, urging Congress to pass a ban on assault weapons. Dating apps such as Tinder, Bumble and Grindr have been put on notice to do more to protect their millions of users or face a mandatory code of conduct. 1 in 3 online daters say they've been the victim of sexual violence involving someone they met via an app.
It's one of the most common ways to meet a partner, but for Sarah, it led to the most traumatic night of her life. After meeting with someone she met on the dating app Bumble, she was sexually assaulted in her own home.
A week later, I tried to report to police, and there was actually no recollection of the conversation on Bumble anymore because he removed me or blocked me.
Sarah says she complained to Bumble and hasn't been on a date since.
Even if it's a good conversation, I've been having to screenshot it on myself just in case a bad outcome was to happen again.
It's stories like Sarah's that prompted a roundtable of dating app executives, state and federal government ministers and safety advocates. Online dating platforms want to make their apps safer and improve complaints processes.
They cannot go into the bottom drawer and just be ignored. We need industry to improve their action, their transparency and their accountability.
We can hold their feet to the fire. I am currently considering mandatory industry codes, which will also capture the dating sites at the moment.
Consent education advocates calling on companies to do more to ensure dating apps aren't exploited by perpetrators.
to me and then deep interest in order to prevent violence in all forms of society and to educate society on what respectful relationships look like, what consent looks like, what healthy intimacy looks like.
Mandatory background and ID checks were floated, but concerns remain about unintended consequences. The e-Safety Commissioner has now been tasked with examining gaps in safety measures on online dating services. Companies behind the app say safety of users remains a top priority. Chantel Alcori, ABC News, Canberra.
After 8 months of waiting, Victorian beekeepers are finally being allowed to bring back their hives from New South Wales. Truckloads of beehives have been returned to Victoria after being stranded north of the border since July when the varroa mite was discovered at the port of Newcastle. The mite can be deadly to bees and has the potential to wipe out entire hives. Bees are transported around Australia to help with crop pollination, and beekeepers say it's a huge relief to see the end of the state border lockdown.
It felt a little bit surreal, and I think it's the excitement is just sort of sinking in. Really, it's sort of a little bit hard to believe because we've been fighting for quite a while to be able to bring them home.
The nominations for the 95th Academy Awards have been announced, with Australian Cate Blanchett nominated for yet another Best Actress prize. 8-time nominee and 2-time winner Blanchett has been put up for Best Actress for her performance as a celebrated orchestra conductor in the film Tar. The Elvis biopic that was filmed in Australia is up for 8 awards, including 3 for Catherine Martin. Daniel Kwan's Everything Everywhere All at Once leads the way with 11 nominations, including Best Picture. The ceremony is set to take place on March 13th. To the Australian Open now, and 9-time champion Novak Djokovic is up 2 sets to love in his quarterfinal matchup against Russian 5th seed Andrei Rublev. Meantime, unheralded Polish player Magda Linette's dream run continues. The unseeded Linette beat former world number 1 Karolina Pliskova to advance to the women's semi-finals and give Poland hope after top seed Iga Świątek was knocked out.
Tennis pundits expected a Polish woman to reach the Final Four, but it wasn't Magda Linette. The unseeded 30-year-old had never reached the Grand Slam semi-finals, and now her dream run continues after stunning the highly fancied Karolina Pliskova.
It's so emotional. I can't really believe it. It's really dreams come true.
Linette will next face Belarusian 5th seed Ariana Sabalenka, whose heavy hitting proved too much for Croatia's Donna Vekic. In a battle of 2 unseeded Americans, Tommy Paul came out on top, although the performance of Ben Shelton will make fans excited. The 20-year-old college student will now resume his study at university next week. The Victoria Azarenka Renaissance has continued. The 33-year-old Belarusian shocked one of the tournament favourites.
Azarenka ripping up the form book and this women's draw.
American Jessica Pegula hadn't dropped a set in the opening 4 rounds, but last night went down in a straight sets upset. The last time Azarenka reached the Final Four at Melbourne Park was a decade ago, when she went on to win her 2nd straight title. Greek star Stefanos Tsitsipas is through to another Australian Open semi-final, but his campaign almost ended abruptly during a moment of frustration.
He swings at anger and it nearly hits the ball cage. You cannot do that.
Tsitsipas says the ball wasn't that close, but acknowledged he made a mistake. The 24-year-old is on collision course with Novak Djokovic, who plays in a semi-final tonight. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
Australia's Diamonds have continued their unbeaten run in netball's Quad Series with a 65-48 win over South Africa in Cape Town. The Diamonds had already qualified for the final and showed their depth against the Proteas. Liz Watson and Steph Wood were rested for the clash, but Australia still dominated the contest. Star shooter Sophie Garvin sat out the final quarter after a heavy collision in the 3rd term. Australia will face New Zealand in the final early tomorrow morning.
The Proteas are a really solid side. They should be really proud of how they played, and their crowd is amazing as well. So they definitely made us work really hard, tested our combinations tonight, but just happy to walk away with the win.
The Kookaburras have produced an inspiring comeback to beat Spain 4-3 in the quarterfinals of the Men's Hockey Cup in India. The world number 1 Australians trailed Spain 2-0 just before half-time. They responded with 4 goals in 8 minutes, including a double from Jeremy Hayward, to take back control of the match. The Spaniards made it 4-3 and had a chance to level the scores with 4 minutes left when they were awarded a penalty stroke for a stick check. But Cookers goalkeeper Andrew Charter stood tall. They'll face either England or Germany in the semi-finals. Staff behind Olympian Peter Bol fear the fight to clear his name has pretty much ruled out his chances of being competitive in Paris. With the 2024 Olympics just 18 months away, coaches say the doping scandal is already taking its toll. The positive test putting his nomination for Young Australian of the Year under a cloud.
Unbelievable. That's how fans felt about Peter Bol's 4th place performance in Tokyo. The Olympian shares the same sentiment, fighting to prove he never took the banned substance, EPO.
I feel like there's a lot of reputational damage for anyone in Peter's position who really hasn't had the opportunity to defend themselves.
Bol's legal team hopes the B sample, to be tested next month, comes back negative. That was the case for American record holder Bernard Lagat. In 2003, he was exonerated for taking synthetic EPO due to an error in testing.
So it is possible that that could have happened in this instance as well, although it is very uncommon.
This is really upsetting Peter at the moment. There's no question about that.
Dick Telford, one of Australia's most respected athletics coaches, says there's no avoiding the psychological impact.
Be dumped as a drug cheat. It's a shocking thing to me, even if it might only be for a few weeks.
Bol's failed drug test in October showed traces of EPO, or erythropoietin, a hormone in the body that stimulates an increase in red blood cells.
If you can increase that oxygen carrying capacity, then you could indeed enhance performance by up to 3%.
That margin can be the difference between several places in the men's 800-metre event. In Tokyo, Bolt missed out on a medal by half a second, and he was just 0.86 of a second from taking the gold for Australia, a feat he is still hoping to achieve in Paris next year.
It's not impossible. I think Peter Bol is a very, very strong character. It's going to require a strong character.
And patience. Lawyers fear the battle ahead will be a lengthy one, the ban up to 4 years if Bol fails to prove his innocence. Brittany Klein, ABC News.
The World Rugby Sevens Series returns to Australia this weekend for the first time in 3 years. It's the 5th stop of the season and comes after a pandemic-induced hiatus. Captains from the 28 men's and women's teams took part in a photo shoot ahead of the tournament, which kicks off on Friday. The Aussie men and women are the reigning series champions.
On Thursday and Friday, a tropical low and a monsoon trough will keep up heavy rain and storms over the tropics, particularly over the top end and northern WA. Meanwhile, troughs and lows will bring showers and storms over the west, the Territory, Queensland, South Australia and New South Wales. Let's take a look at the capitals for Thursday. It'll be sunny in Perth and Adelaide, cloudy in Melbourne, Canberra, Sydney, Brisbane and Hobart, showers with a possible storm in Darwin. And looking at Friday, cloudy in Perth, Canberra and Hobart, sunny in Melbourne and Adelaide, showers in Sydney, possible showers in Brisbane, showers with a possible storm in Darwin.
And that's the latest from ABC News. Sovereignty, 50 years of the Tent Embassy is up next, followed by The World with Yvonne Yong. I'm Andrea Niehoff. I'll see you again soon.
January 26th, the ABC gives you the best seats in the house for Australia Day Live to honour country and celebrate the Australian spirit. A fireworks and maritime show on the harbour with performances from some of our biggest stars. Casey Donovan, Dami Im, Christine Anu, William Barton, Isaiah Firebrace and lots more. A concert for the country you won't want to miss. Australia Day Live, tomorrow on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
We'll show the rest of the world how to party.
All right, let's get our feathers on.
Celebrate your queer with the ABC.
ABC is the only place to see Sydney World Pride. Now, that's a bit fabulous. Just like our skull.
History is repeating. A chant echoing through time, scenes played out over and again on this site. In 1972, a small group of Aboriginal activists transformed an opportunistic accident into the world's longest-running protest, capturing global attention and bringing significant historical and political change in Australia.
Raising the flag, saying that we're aliens in our own land and that we're sovereignty.
We're going to get our bloody land, even if we have to take it.
It's a time to celebrate, but it's also a time to mourn and reflect on 50 years.
From its inception, the Tent Embassy has been interwoven with Canberra's physical and political landscape. Originally a humble beach umbrella, it's grown to become a symbol of Aboriginal land rights and sovereignty activism. The establishment of the embassy remains a pivotal moment in Australia's social history and an icon for First Nations people. The 60s and early 70s were a time for change in Australia. In 1963, the Australian government took 300 square kilometres of land from the Yolngu people in Arnhem Land, so mining company Jaminco could extract the bauxite.
The situation that's developed because of the wishes of the Yirrkala people has become complex. The cause remains simple: the bauxite.
In 1966, 200 Gurindji stockmen, domestic workers and their families walked off Wave Hill Station, beginning a 7-year strike fighting for equal pay conditions and land ownership.
These Aboriginal stockmen are on strike. This is the Wave Hill moment.
The strike highlighted some of the issues facing Aboriginal people. A year later, the successful 1967 referendum meant Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would finally be counted as part of the population and provided more momentum to the land rights struggle by raising the profile of Indigenous issues with the wider Australian public.
We didn't see ourselves as Australian. We were Murris. We didn't see back home. We were Aboriginal people, and they always reminded us of the fact that we were Aboriginal and the fact that there's a place for you Aborigines, and it's not in our white community and not in our clubs and pubs.
On the eve of Australia Day in 1972, the McMahon Liberal government announced its long-awaited policy on Indigenous affairs. It rejected independent ownership of the traditional land to Indigenous people in favour of 50-year general purpose leases. It excluded all mineral and forest rights but allowed mining companies to access Aboriginal reserves.
That was pretty much, a bit of a hammer in the nail in the coffin for us to shut the lid on the past and say, okay, whatever it takes, here we come. We're coming after what is rightfully ours.
Indigenous groups were appalled at the government's continued refusal to acknowledge Aboriginal rights.
That's what land rights mean. That means a lot of money. That means a lot of people that are getting rich off your blood and guts.
In Sydney, 4 young men came together. They were to change Aboriginal Australia forever.
Michael Anderson, Billy Craigie, Joe Williams and Tony Corey, they headed to the nation's capital, but they didn't really have a protest plan.
When we got there, Canberra was rainy, and I always imagined that we put it up in the wintertime, and it was January because it was so cold. And we said, well, we're in it to confront Peter McMahon and his government, and 4 of us were here. And we thought, okay, this is what we got to do something. We haven't worked that out yet. So then they went through the idea of a hunger strike, and I recall my mate Billy saying, yeah, well, we've been hungry all our lives, so no, I think we'll pass on that one. And we're going to get someone to feed us anyway while we're at the embassy. At the protest, and then someone said, oh, there was a guy in India, they have a popular way of protesting. They pour fuel on themselves and light them with a match and set fire to themselves. Well, that was out of the question, I can assure you that. Everyone just looked at each other and shook our heads without saying anything. And then someone else said, well, what do? We go tribal, strip off, stand naked with spears, and just wait for someone to come and talk to us. No, that's not all. So anyway, Tony Curry was on the throne down the hallway with the door open, and he was listening to the conversation. And then what he called out, he said, "This is the home of embassies here. So why don't we just call it the Aboriginal Embassy?" And that we were sold on it immediately. And so we ended up with plaques. We made it manila folders, so we made up plaques and tall cardboard boxes, and we could put these signs up. And then the old man whose house we were at, he didn't have a tent. He said, "I can't help you with a tent, boys," but he said, "I can give you a beach umbrella." And we took that over, and that became the embassy. We ended up an exhibit, I suppose, in a zoo, because I think every car in Canberra, when they realised on the ABC radio that there's 2 black people sitting over here in front of Parliament House under a beach umbrella.
It stands to this day as a testament to the limitations of Australian laws and governments and the lack of action on Indigenous rights.
I know being younger, we have this fire in our belly and we're really passionate.
Leah House's grandmother Matilda joined the protest on the lawns of Old Parliament House.
It just makes me feel connected. It makes me feel like a part of me was there. And it's why I think I am so passionate today, because I know the history of my family and the connection that we have at that space.
We have come an incredibly long way, and I think we need to acknowledge the founders of the Tent Embassy for having their courage and conviction at a time when it would have been very hard knowing the consequences of setting up a place outside the Australian Parliament.
Those 4 young men, not all of them still with us, really sparked something in this country where the politicians, particularly the fact that it was out at the front of what is now Old Parliament House, had to actually take notice of what First Nations people were saying.
The setting up of an embassy and the intensive pressure for land rights comes from a new generation of Aboriginal spokesmen and leaders. On the whole, they're younger, more impatient and more militant than their predecessors.
Aboriginals think that the country still belongs to them, and all they want is for white man to recognise this fact and acknowledge it, and give them areas back which they decide they want back.
This is one of the most wealthiest countries in the world, per head of population speaking. But to me, it's a scandal that there are so many Aboriginal kids dying from malnutrition, that there are so many blacks living in ghettos, in shanty towns, when in fact this is our land.
The embassy grew from one umbrella to a cluster of dozens of tents, attracted a diverse and articulate group of diplomatic staff, activists and supporters. But for the McMahon government, it was a huge embarrassment at home and around the world. Camping on Crown land was illegal, but considering most Crown land in the Northern Territory belonged to the state, Aboriginal people were exempt. Nobody ever thought that activists would camp in the nation's capital. They found a gap in the law.
As it turned out, there was not a law in Australia that could stop us from putting that embassy up.
I think the embassy has had the success it has had, what it had in the 70s, because back then it was such an original stunt. Like what they did, what those men did, and what all the mob did in those months after establishing the space had never been done before. And it was in a generation that kind of activism, yeah, it just hadn't been done. It was original. So I think that's why it has stood the test of time.
While the embassy enjoyed wide support, some politicians and members of the general public believed that the protest was nothing more than trespassing and was a blot on the Canberra landscape.
All I'm trying to basically say is that the time of white domination of the black movement is over. It's time for black people to do things for themselves and get things for themselves, because the only way they'll ever get anything, and we're giving it.
The fact that the 10 embassy is still there 50 years on, making a very clear statement about the sovereign rights of First Nations people, making a very clear statement about the condition of Aboriginal Australia, is testament to just how important it was. And I think it's a symbol that has come to represent, to me personally, the struggle, the political struggle in particular of Aboriginal Australia.
I thought that won't last long. And then as time progressed, I remembered feeling this is one way to make governments listen by your presence. And over time, we've seen issues that have been covered in some of those debates. And in particular, when the McMahon government were not considering Aboriginal land rights, that's when the 10 embassy came to the fore. But it's been really just a significant point of reference at which Indigenous people have been able to go there and have their issues promulgated through both media and to members of Parliament.
On the 6th of February, the embassy issued a list of demands: complete rights to the Northern Territory as a state within Australia and the installation of a primary Aboriginal state parliament. These rights would include all mining rights to the land, ownership and mining rights of all Australian reserve lands in Australia, the preservation of all sacred sites in Australia, ownership of areas in major cities including mining rights, compensation for lands that were not able to be returned starting with $6 billion and including a percentage of the gross national income every year.
I'd like to just think of myself and my three colleagues as the guys who woke Australia up and made the world aware of the fact that there was a problem here.
A visit by then opposition leader Gough Whitlam was seen as a great success in gaining recognition for their cause and having their ideas heard by those in power. On July 20th, during a parliamentary recess in the absence of Labor members, an amended trespass on Commonwealth lands in the ACT was passed, giving the Commonwealth powers to forcibly remove the embassy tents. Hours later, hundreds of Australian Federal Police moved in to dismantle the embassy tents.
The 10 embassy had been on the lawns outside Federal Parliament for 6 months. It was there on Commonwealth land as a symbolic protest against the federal government's refusal to grant Aboriginal land rights. It didn't persuade the government to change its mind on that, but it did persuade them to pass an ordinance to stop the squatters. It was gazetted this morning, and the ACT police moved in shortly afterwards.
The police are only doing their duty, but it's a pretty dirty duty they've been given to do.
It's bad for the police, but it's bad for the whole nation.
Who's won as a result of today?
I suppose Australia's lost, and the Aboriginal people at least will have everybody in Australia know what they're fighting about tonight.
It was a day in history that, for the first time, Aborigines really clashed with the authorities over fighting for our rights.
Later, the police returned in force.
That was pretty wild. It was. I've been in some brawls in pubs, and I've been in a few brawls on rugby league fields, all in brawls. Nothing like this. Nothing like that. And I must say that we met up with some of the policemen later who went to hospital because there were 18 of us went to jail, protesters. There were non-Aboriginal people as well in that. And they fought just as hard as we did.
Images of police violence against protesters spread across the country, leading to even greater support for the embassy and its aims. On July 30th, 1972, 2,000 people marched to Parliament House to reenact the Aboriginal tent embassy. The police removed the tents but let the demonstrators remain. The next month, the government convened the National Conference of Aboriginal and Islander Advisory Councillors.
We will legislate to give Aborigines land rights. Not just because their case is beyond argument, but because all of us as Australians are diminished, while the Aborigines are denied their rightful place in this nation.
Being born Aboriginal in this country is political. You cannot be Aboriginal and not be political. So I do feel that it's a responsibility for myself and my family to continue to carry that fight that my nan was a part of back in 72 and has been a part of every day since.
To me, it's about the way we work together to address the inequalities, having the same opportunities, having choices, and being accepted for who they are, not for the colour of their skin or for their ethnicity, but because they happen to be a human being, the unique individual who has the potential to offer so much, not only to their family and community, but to our country. For 65,000 years, our people looked after.
The fire continues to burn there, and it still says something very powerful to the Australian public, and that is that Aboriginal Australia has been here for a very long time and will continue to be here into the future.
Michael's getting a good boy now.
Yeah.
Let's see, it's 5 months.
By the end of the year, the Department of Aboriginal Affairs was established and it enacted a range of community initiatives, including a national Aboriginal health service. After 9 years of struggle, on August 16, 1975, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam went to Dagaragu and poured a handful of Dagaragu soil into Vincent Lingiari's hand.
I solemnly hand to you these deeds as proof in Australian law that these lands belong to the Gurindji people.
Between 1972 and 1992, the embassy was established at a succession of sites across Canberra. It not only focused on land rights, but protesters also demanded action on funding for Aboriginal communities, self-determination and acknowledgement of sovereign Indigenous nations.
we achieved a lot of things from that Aboriginal embassy, and governments worked with us, particularly Jock Whitlam and Malcolm Fraser, when he became Prime Minister. And we were pursuing a great deal of development.
On the 20th anniversary of the original protest, the embassy was permanently re-established on its original site, the walls outside Old Parliament House. Over the years, the tent embassy has become the focal point for a range of protests, including against Aboriginal deaths in custody, the Howard government's Northern Territory intervention in 2007, and cuts to essential Indigenous services. But the embassy remains controversial. Many have challenged its validity, and a number of arson attacks have damaged buildings within the camp. Recently, First Nation leaders, traditional owners, and the embassy condemned protests outside Parliament House following a devastating fire which damaged the facade.
They've disrespected the local values, they've totally disregarded the history, the legacy, and the hard fight that our old people have fought here on country.
Elders of the Aboriginal tent embassy were dismayed by alt-right and anti-vaccination protests near Old Parliament House.
They need to have a good, hard look at themselves. They are doing no favours to anyone in the way in which they're conducting themselves. I am very disappointed in seeing the coalescing of anti-vaxxers and a so-called sovereignty movement.
And I think the problem that I've really watched over the last few weeks as we're watching it unfold has been the total abuse of the trauma of our people and our struggle. And watching that has really activated a lot of trauma within me.
Those protests are at odds with the aims of the tent embassy. The symbolism of the embassy has grown from its inception and has taken on different meanings, but it's always provoked and insisted on genuine, respectful engagement with First Nations jurisdictions, laws, and governments.
I think the greatest achievement is that why is it there? I think that's everybody's asking. That's what's on the lips of everybody. Why is the embassy still there? And so when they look at themselves in the mirror and ask themselves that question, they have to look over their shoulder to see, okay, well, history hasn't been kind, and maybe we do need to change our discourse in order to improve the status here of Aboriginal people and give them proper recognition.
While the 50th anniversary will be acknowledged with a series of special events, the actual date, January 26th, remains a divisive day for many.
I don't support changing the date. I support abolishing the date because at the core of it, what it will always represent is the genocide of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We are still losing our children to the system at higher rates now than we were back in the stolen generations. The incarceration rates for our people, it's just, how far have we actually come? So to celebrate this country and what it represents and what it symbolizes and that multicultural narrative, when its very existence represents so much violence, so much trauma, and the genocide of our people.
I see it as a day in which we reflect and we celebrate as a people. Because to me, I've always had this view that if you take the logic of Invasion Day being the 26th of January, then every day subsequent to the year in which the colony was established is an invasion day. So no day would be suitable if we take the logic of what I hear. What we should be doing is saying, why don't we acknowledge that we are still a strength? We were impacted by the history of the past, but we've got an opportunity of moving on. And sometimes I get frustrated. I just wish as much energy was put into debates around domestic violence, the safety of our women, reducing sexual abuse, and closing the gaps on all the targets as we put into one day. Because that's where change will come. We can't turn back the First Fleet. Australia has been developed from that point. Yes, there are many sad points in the connection of our history. But by gee, we've got a lot of good things to celebrate.
It is a very divisive date, increasingly in this country. I'm a realist, and I know that the date's not going to change soon, but we need to remember it was only in 1994 that the date was actually formalised. And there have been many dates for Australia Day over the course of the last 250 years. I don't think that date would be chosen if it was today, because it's divisive. It represents to First Nations people the coming of Governor Phillip and the English claiming Australia. So it is not a day that brings people together. The Australia Day theme is about reflecting on the truth of the story of Australia, of the amazing gift that First Nations people bring to this country, and that's the oldest continuous surviving culture on planet Earth. And the fact that we have been a nation, that our nations that have survived is something for everyone to celebrate.
Despite the date of the anniversary, it is a 50-year legacy of protest and support for the grassroots campaigns around the recognition of land rights, Aboriginal sovereignty, and addressing the very serious issues facing First Australians.
I want to have Aboriginal communities believe and know that we are committed to having their voices heard, and that they have a say in how government programs work at their community level. I want to join states in that process. So when state and territory governments are working with communities, they're sitting down with them and planning it together, and then implementing the reforms and changes. That's where the change will come. And that's where we will close the gap to community level.
Change is hard and change is slow, and change usually has to be fought for. And I think that the fact that we've got so many young Aboriginal people today who are asserting their identity, asserting their rights.
The biggest thing that's come out of it for me, being the granddaughter of Matilda House, who was there in the 70s, is the strength and the power that us younger generations now hold, and how we move forward and how we show up in this colony. And I don't think that can be understated, the strength that our generations draw from that space that has been held by incredible Black bodies for 50 years.
The youth, I just want to put it to you, they need to paint their picture now into the future, and we'll support and give them every support and guidance we can.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, we'll be joined by all the recipients of Australian of the Year awards, fresh from the announcement in Canberra.
And go around the country to mark Australia Day events, including the shores of the harbour for the Woolgora morning ceremony. We'll see you then.
I'm hoping to find the one in my life.
I could be a good partner.
I hope someday that I'll find somebody to give my heart to.
Finding love can be hard.
I'm so nervous. I think I'm going to pass out. You know my date?
They're taking their first steps.
What you look amazing.
Yeah, you look very nice yourself.
Into the dating world.
I'll never this forever.
I think she's very nice.
Welcome to the mom of dating live.
Better date than never. Tuesday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView.
You made that sound really creepy. That's when you thought things wouldn't get weirder. Sam, colonoscopies is your expert.
The new season of Hard Quiz
Nothing's weird on this show, mate.
starts February 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Summer on ABC iView.
This is going to be a good thing.
From quality Australian stories
It's not your fault.
Oh, come on, who doesn't watch fireworks?
to overseas award winners.
27 years and everything that's happened.
Stream the best in drama for free. Come on, cowboy. Shut your mouth and come in. This summer on ABC iView. Good evening, it's Wednesday the 25th of January. Here are our top stories. Germany confirms it will send a highly sought after Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Joe Biden calls on Congress to move swiftly to ban assault weapons in the wake of recent mass shootings. Top honours for body image activist Taran Brumsett, who's been named Australian of the Year. And a massive iceberg the size of London breaks off the Antarctic continent. You're watching The World. Hello there, I'm Yvonne Young. A little later, we'll take a closer look at the Russian mercenary group Wagner. In breaking news, and the German government has confirmed it will send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine and allow other countries to do the same. Leopard 2s are made in Germany, and only Berlin has the authority to approve their export. Pressure was building on the German government, with Ukraine saying modern battle tanks could be the key to winning its war with Russia. The decision, given a short time ago, marks the first time German tanks will be used on a battlefield in Europe since the Second World War. The US president has called on Congress to quickly progress a bill banning assault weapons. Back-to-back shootings have killed more than 20 people across California and Washington state in just a few days. As Sarah Jane Bell reports, authorities have so far been unable to determine the motives for the shootings.
Police secure yet another crime scene after a random shooting in the US. This time, the act of violence killed 3 people at a convenience store in Washington state. The alleged attacker, a 21-year-old.
The suspect had borrowed a woman's phone. He then called his mother, and he made several incriminating statements, including, "I killed those people."
Officers responded, but it was too late.
The suspect apparently shot and killed himself.
Police say there was no conflict between the shooter and the victims.
I have no information about why he did this.
It follows 39 mass killings in the US this year and comes as communities in California come to terms with the carnage of 2 shootings in the past week. 11 people were killed welcoming in the Lunar New Year at a dance hall.
Wake up now. He doesn't respond. And then I find out my hand is a lot of blood.
We will not allow the actions of a single male to diminish the light that is the city of Monterey Park.
7 Chinese and Latino farm workers were killed at Half Moon Bay. The alleged 67-year-old gunman was arrested, but the motive remains unclear.
The whole community is very sad because it was a terrible tragedy that happened at work.
The latest shootings have again sparked fierce debate over gun laws.
Where's the Republican Party been on gun safety reform? They blocked it every step of the way.
Yesterday, my buddy Dianne Feinstein introduced her Senate weapon of assault weapons ban. I'm asking you all to send that to my desk as quickly as you can.
While possible laws are discussed, communities will continue to process the trauma. Sarah Jane Bell, ABC News.
13 crew members have been rescued after a cargo ship sank off southwestern Japan. South Korean and Japanese Coast Guards, assisted by planes, are continuing to search the area for 9 crew members who are still missing. A distress call was signalled from the Hong Kong registered vessel late on Tuesday during harsh weather conditions. The 22 crew members, all Chinese and Myanmar nationals, were transferred to lifeboats and the search is continuing. Stringent new alcohol restrictions come into effect today in Alice Springs to try and break a relentless crime wave the Northern Territory town's been battling for months. The Prime Minister's visit to Alice Springs yesterday was a relief to some, while others fear a return to government control over their lives.
At this town camp in Alice Springs, the reality of new liquor restrictions is sinking in.
I think it's a good idea. So some people can have a break from drinking instead of drinking all every day.
After months of escalating crime and violence, last night a fly-in visit from the Prime Minister and a grog crackdown announced.
These are complex problems and they require a full solution.
As well as immediate bottle shop restrictions, limiting opening hours and capping purchases. There will be a review to see if NT intervention-era liquor bans should be restored 6 months after they ended, with the Territory leader now conceding damage has been done.
I acknowledge that with 6 months of data, we need to do more, and that's why we will continue to work in this space with community.
For some, a Prime Minister arriving with new restrictions for Central Australia had an eerie familiarity. 15 years ago, trucks rolled in with federal police, but without local consultation to try to solve serious social woes on the ground.
What we can only describe as a national emergency.
Alcohol was banned from dozens of communities and welfare payments restricted. Leaders say it left thousands disempowered. The impact still felt across the remote NT, where housing and health remain poor.
I think the whole remote areas are going to be reviewed. I mean, the causes of this go back to the day of the intervention.
A local Aboriginal council says Alice Springs town camps are not supportive of a return to blanket alcohol bans. What these laws did was criminalise Aboriginal people based on where they live, says Tengagia CEO Walter Shaw. A senior bureaucrat overseeing the review of alcohol bans now has 1 week to advise if they should be reimposed, and communities would then need to apply to opt out. Matt Garrick, ABC News.
Body image activist Taryn Bromford has been named the 2023 Australian of the Year. The awards ceremony has been held in Canberra tonight. Reporter Stephanie Boris was there.
Well, there were 8 finalists for Australian of the Year, but of course there could only be one winner. And tonight it has been announced that Taryn Bromford is the Australian of the Year for 2023. Now, she's from South Australia and she founded what's called the Body Image Movement. Initially, the focus was all about empowering women to love and accept their bodies, and she created a documentary around that. But she's gone on to create further documentaries and write further books, now also focusing on children and encouraging children to accept themselves for who they are. In her acceptance speech tonight, she spoke about body shaming being a universal problem, and she said that it's not our bodies that need to change, it's our perspective. Take a listen to what she had during her acceptance speech tonight.
Australia, it is not our life's purpose to be at war with our body. Collectively, we are facing some of the most challenging environmental, humanitarian and social issues of our time. What if instead of spending our days consumed by hating our bodies, we could invest our time together to solve these challenges? And what if instead of spending their precious time and energy at war with their bodies, our young people were free to become the leaders, big thinkers and game changers the world needs more of right now? It's not our bodies that need to change, it's our perspective.
So there were 3 other awards handed out tonight, one of them being the Local Australian of the Year, the winner being Amar Singh. He founded a charity after being subjected to racial abuse, and what he wanted to do was try and create more tolerance in the community while at the same time also helping others. So his charity actually provides food for people in need, particularly in Western Sydney, but the charity has also helped out during other circumstances as well. The Young Australian of the Year is Awa Mabil. Now some people may know him as a Socceroo player, but the reason he got the award tonight was because of a charity he co-founded that really works towards improving the health and education outcomes of refugees. He wasn't actually here tonight, the reason being he's off training overseas in Europe, so his family accepted the award for him tonight. And finally, the Senior Australian of the Year was Tom Calmer. He's a human rights and social justices campaigner for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, and he's been doing that for 45 years. So some incredible people that we've learned about here tonight and that have been awarded. This is the 63rd year that there's been an Australian of the Year, and expect many more of them to come in the years ahead.
Authorities in Norway have arrested a defector from the Russian mercenary Wagner Group after disagreements about his security situation. Andrei Medvedev has sought asylum, saying he witnessed the executions of people who had also tried to defect from the group. The US has said it will designate Wagner a transnational criminal organization, saying the shadowy outfit is committing widespread atrocities in places like Ukraine, where recruits have been fighting alongside Russian troops. Isabella Curry has been researching the group and says it's hard to know how many are involved or exactly how it operates.
It's actually quite challenging to determine the size of the Wagner Group. They operate in a sort of grey area internationally, and because of that, the actual figures about how many members there are in the group, the leadership structure is quite ambiguous. We just don't really know, despite all of our efforts to work it out.
Do we know where it operates?
The organisation itself isn't really an organisation. It operates out of a collective of shell companies and front organisations. They're based, the training is based alongside a Russian Ministry of Defence area, but other than that, it's really ambiguous. They recently opened a headquarters in St. Petersburg, so I suppose we could assume that some of the coordination is happening out of that area, but it's just too challenging to tell.
How much are they a separate force to the Russian army, especially in Ukraine, and how vital are they to Russia's forces?
That's quite a contentious question. Many researchers and academics, myself included, consider the Wagner Group to be an extension of the Kremlin, operating alongside the Russian military and security ministry, essentially working as an arm of the GRU. In Ukraine, I suppose they have functioned as somewhat of an effective force for cannon fodder. They have pumped a lot of numbers into Ukraine to substitute the military effort that's ongoing. Their effectiveness really, they have been quite instrumental in capturing villages and certain areas of the cities, but it's again challenging because they're quite integrated with the military effort.
How important is testimony from defectors like Andrei Medvedev in gathering a better idea about how Wagner operates?
It's absolutely essential. That information coming out of defectors is really important for researchers to create a sense of what Wagner's up to, where have they been, do we have any idea of the strategy that's coming out of those areas? So hopefully what we get from Medvedev will be really helpful in forming those pieces and the ongoing efforts to really expose what's happening with Wagner.
He's just been arrested for his own safety because it's been determined he's in danger, even in Norway. How indicative is this of just how dangerous the Wagner Group can be?
Massively. The group itself is terrifying. I believe Medvedev reported that he defected and sought asylum in Norway because he had seen members of the Wagner Group being executed for deserting. And we do know as well that recently, I think it was towards the end of last year, Yevgeny Luzhin was executed on camera, then spread around social media, and he was known to be a member of the Wagner Group, and he was trying, he had been exchanged back to Russia in a prisoner exchange from Ukraine, and that really emphasizes the way that Wagner and the Russian military is thinking with these soldiers, for lack of a better word, and the role that they're playing in the effort, because they really just function as additional people on the ground.
What do we know about how the group operates, how it's changed over the years?
Yes, certainly. So the group first entered really the public space in around 2014 with the first war in Donbass. That was our first real insight into Wagner and this new emerging structure of private soldiers. Over the last 8 years, they've operated in several countries internationally as on-call armies, providing security for regimes and autocratic actors. Looking to Ukraine, we've seen this evolution where the members entering Wagner had really functioned by initially signing up. They received training. We don't really know how long the training went for, but we do know that they received it in that base that they were using alongside the military forces. However, in the last 12 months, we've seen this shift where Prigozhin, who is the financier of Wagner and the head who created this private military, he has been recruiting from prisons, and new recruits and conscripts aren't really receiving any training. There have been reports that that's quite a contentious issue at the moment, and they're needing to source their own equipment, including medical equipment. And so I think there's been a remarkable shift in really how the group's operating.
And Isabel, how do nations try to counter operations like Wagner?
It's really challenging. I think Wagner, as it stands, is a new phenomenon. We haven't really seen this semi-state private army rolling along with official militaries. We've seen sanctions placed on integral members of the Wagner group, including its leader, Prigozhin. I think what states are doing that is really effective is exposing what the group is doing, and they're pushing to learn more about what the group is doing and where they are operating, so that we can keep bringing to light the atrocities that the group commits, strategies that they're working towards in countries that they're operating in. That's really helpful, I think, in exposing just with the inner workings of the group.
Isabella Curry, good to talk. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
An iceberg almost the size of Greater London has broken off the Brunt ice shelf in Antarctica. Satellite imagery shows the new iceberg breaking away from the 150-metre thick ice shelf during the spring tide. The British Antarctic Survey Research Institute says cracks developed in the area a decade ago. It's the second iceberg to break off the Brunt ice shelf in 2 years. The world's doomsday clock has been moved closer to midnight because of the threat of nuclear war and climate volatility. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has moved the symbolic measure 10 seconds closer to the point of annihilation. It's now 90 seconds to midnight, its closest point since it was established in 1947.
Russia's thinly veiled threats to use nuclear weapons remind the world that escalation of the conflict by accident, intention, or miscalculation is a terrible risk. The possibilities that the conflict could spin out of anyone's control remains high.
Interest rates are tipped to be hiked again next month after the latest higher than expected inflation figures. Consumer prices are growing at their fastest pace since 1990, driven by rising travel and electricity costs. Annual inflation is now at 7.8%, raising real fears of even more short mortgage stress.
Richard Oliver has never seen construction costs go up this quickly.
I myself built a house in 2022, so I know how expensive it was to do that.
Building costs have surged almost 18% in a year, with steel the latest price spike. In the 12 months to December, consumer prices shot up by 7.8%. In the last quarter, inflation was up 1.9%, driven by rising electricity bills and soaring costs to travel here and overseas. Food went up slightly, however, fruit and vegetable costs did come down after the East Coast floods. The cost of new clothes is also increasing, so some are mending what they have, like Honor Wolf, whose rent just went up.
Obviously, the cost of living is extremely high, especially when it comes to like bills, rent.
The Treasurer is blaming the war in Ukraine and supply chain disruptions.
Inflation was the defining challenge in our economy in 2022, and it will be a defining challenge in our economy in 2023.
There are signs that the price rises are peaking, but today's numbers even took some economists by surprise. Most are predicting that the Reserve Bank will raise interest rates again next month to curb inflation. A Westpac senior economist thinks the cash rate will go up by another 1/4 percentage point.
While the RBA is going to be raising rates at the next meeting, they'll be starting to give signals that they're willing to pause and consider.
Richard Oliver is worried about how high his mortgage repayments could go.
It's a nerve-wracking market, it's a nerve-wracking time.
A sentiment that is felt by many Australians. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
Group tours abroad are about to restart for people in China after years of COVID border restrictions. 20 countries will be on the approved list for travel, but Australia isn't one of them. For more on why it hasn't made the cut, I'm joined by Professor of Tourism and Services Marketing at Edith Cowan University, Sam Huang. Now, Sam, tell us what you've noticed in terms of visitor numbers from China in recent years. We're referring not only to travellers, but students, business people. How have those numbers changed?
Well, COVID is a big hit to reduce the number. Over the past 3 years, we see there's virtually no tourists to Australia from China. Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Well, we should really be concerned, but we could really analyze the situation now. China has been open to 20 countries over the world, but Australia is not included in the list. What I can see is there's a diplomacy tool China is using to exercise the tourism side. I think Australia can be ready to receive more Chinese tourists. This is the time for us to grab more Chinese tourists. I think
how concerned should we be that Australia isn't on the approved list of group travellers outbound from China?
I think we should be concerned reasonably, but not over concerned. I think it's reasonable to see the Chinese government exercise a kind of diplomacy. I examined the 20 countries. Australia is not in the list, but New Zealand is among the countries.
So what does that say? Yeah, what does that say about how China regards Australia?
I think there may be related to mandatory testing requested by Australian authorities upon Chinese tourists coming into Australia. I don't know whether this is still ongoing or it's already done, but this is something the Chinese authority may be concerned. If you look at Japan and South Korea, these two countries imposed a similar type of measure against Chinese tourists, and then the Chinese authority implemented this countermeasure, if I can say, using that term. That's why we don't see Australia is back in the list.
So what are the forecasts now for visitors from China over the next 10 years?
Well, 10 years is probably too long as a time frame to forecast. But we probably can see over the short term, in the short term, in 1 or 2 years' time, we probably won't be able to come back comparing to the pre-COVID level. If you look at the figures of pre-COVID, we have 1.4 million visitor arrivals from China in 2019. This is it's hardly we can get the figure in a couple of years' time, but we can prepare for that. I see in the long term probably a lot of variables can be there to determine Chinese tourist arrivals to Australia.
How worried are Australian businesses about the current climate, and what are they doing to woo more Chinese visitors?
I think we can apply both short-term strategies and long-term strategies. For short-term strategies, I think it's critical we rebuild our capacity. It's my understanding that over the past 3 years, the industry has been damaged to a certain degree. We probably are lacking the necessary tourism personnel in the industry. Most relevant would be Chinese tour guides. If we don't have the Chinese tour guides to receive the group of tourists, we can't really, even though there are a number of tour groups coming over, we can't really receive. Because it's my observation that for some tour operators, they lose their staff. It's hard to rebuild the staff force in the short term. That's why I see probably in the short term we need to rebuild the capacity. In the long term,
Yeah, do you think they need to target more visitors from other emerging travel markets in the region, perhaps?
Well, we could look beyond the China market. We could really look at the Indian market, but we can't really compare the Indian market with the Chinese market. If you look at the pre-COVID figure, it's non-comparable. The Chinese market is so huge. What's so huge? It's probably about 15% of our international visitor arrivals of the total market. And spending, I mean, the tourism earning from Australia regarding the Chinese inbound tourists is probably 26% of our total earnings, total international tourism earnings. That's why it's very hard to find a replacement market. But of course, we can think about some alternative market like India. India will be the world's most populous country in a couple of months' time, according to some forecasts.
And going the other way, when can Australians visit China for holidays again? At the moment, travel there is restricted.
I think pretty soon, in a few months' time, I think we are able to travel to China. The things are evolving very quickly. Just a few weeks' time, you could see a completely different situation, including the COVID infections in China. So I'm pretty confident that in a few months' time, we'll be able to travel to China.
San Juan, good to talk. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my pleasure.
4 tons of cocaine has been seized by the Colombian Navy. Authorities intercepted a semi-submersible ship on Monday. It was taken to dock where the Army unloaded packages for testing. 4 crew members were detained, and police say the operation took 11 million doses out of the market. So far, the Colombian Navy has seized nearly 10 tons of cocaine hydrochloride this year. A one-day strike in a major airport in Germany has grounded planes. The action cancelled about 300 takeoffs and landings at a major airport in Berlin, affecting nearly 35,000 passengers. Workers across ground services and security are calling for progress to be made in wage talks. The strike began in the early hours of Wednesday morning. Staff behind Olympian Peter Bol fear the fight to clear his name has pretty much ruled out his chances of being competitive in Paris. With the 2024 Olympics just 18 months away, coaches say the doping scandal is already taking its toll. A positive test putting his nomination for Young Australian of the Year under a cloud.
Unbelievable. That's how fans felt about Peter Bol's 4th place performance in Tokyo. The Olympian shares the same sentiment, fighting to prove he never took the banned substance, EPO.
I feel like there's a lot of reputational damage for anyone in Peter's position who really hasn't had the opportunity to defend themselves.
Bol's legal team hopes the B sample, to be tested next month, comes back negative. That was the case for American record holder Bernard Lagat. In 2003, he was exonerated for taking synthetic EPO due to an error in testing.
So it is possible that that could have happened in this instance as well, although it is very uncommon.
This is really upsetting Peter at the moment. There's no question about that.
Dick Telford, one of Australia's most respected athletics coaches, says there's no avoiding the psychological impact.
be dubbed as a drug cheat. It's a shocking thing to me, even if it might only be for a few weeks.
Bowles' failed drug test in October showed traces of EPO, or erythropoietin, a hormone in the body that stimulates an increase in red blood cells.
If you can increase that oxygen carrying capacity, then you could indeed enhance performance by up to 3%.
That margin could be the difference between several places in the men's 800-metre event. In Tokyo, Bolt missed out on the medal by half a second, and he was just 0.86 of a second from taking the gold for Australia, a feat he is still hoping to achieve in Paris next year.
It's not impossible. I think Peter Bolt is a very, very strong character. It's going to require a strong character.
And patience. Lawyers fear the battle ahead will be a lengthy one, the ban up to 4 years if Bolt fails to prove his innocence. Brittany Klein, ABC News.
The nominations for the 95th Academy Awards have been announced, with Australian Cate Blanchett nominated for yet another Best Actress prize. 8-time nominee and 2-time winner Blanchett has been put up for Best Actress for her performance as a celebrated orchestra conductor in the film Tar. The Elvis biopic that was filmed in Australia is up for 8 awards, including 3 for Catherine Martin. And Daniel Kwan's Everything Everywhere All at Once leads the way with 11 nominations, including Best Picture. The ceremony is set to take place on March the 13th. You're watching The World, the top stories we're following tonight. Taryn Bromfitt has been announced as the 2023 Australian of the Year for her work improving children's body image, while Professor Tom Calma has been named the Senior Australian of the Year, and Sokaru Awamavil was awarded Young Australian of the Year. Germany has announced plans to send heavy tanks to Ukraine, and the United States is poised to do so, a move that Russia has labelled a blatant provocation. President Joe Biden has called for assault weapons to be banned following back-to-back shootings across California and Washington state. A number of senior officials have been dismissed in Ukraine's biggest political shake-up since the start of the war. A top advisor, 4 deputy ministers and 5 regional governors have left their posts after President Volodymyr Zelensky launched a broad anti-corruption drive. The crackdown on corrupt behaviour is one of the European Union's key demands for Ukraine if the country is to join the bloc. Classified documents have been found at the home of former US Vice President Mike Pence. In a letter shared with US media, his lawyer argues a small number of documents with classified markings were inadvertently taken to Mr. Pence's home at the end of Donald Trump's presidency. The documents were allegedly discovered last week after Mr. Pence had engaged a lawyer to review records stored in his home. The FBI has collected the documents. A teenager arrested in Adelaide CBD last Friday was allegedly planning to carry out a mass killing. A South Australian magistrate has described the boy as a serious risk to the community, with court documents revealing the boy's plan was based on a US school shooting with the intention to seek notoriety.
Armed with Molotov cocktails, lighters, knives and scissors, court documents allege the 17-year-old was caught near Rundle Mall in the early hours of Friday, scouting possible locations to carry out his chilling plan. That plan, outlined in a diary and several notebooks, allegedly including killing as many people as he could, as well as himself, by setting fire to a busy shop or nightclub. The diary included a list of items needed, clothing to be worn, and referenced in detail the Columbine massacre and the intent to kill more victims than that event. If he was not apprehended by police, he had full intentions of carrying out the attack. Court documents further state the boy, who is in state care, allegedly left his home, telling a youth worker he was going out and killing so many people he would be on the news. In his police interview, he allegedly said he had taken the tram to the CBD and was arrested while seeking to set fire to a bin in an attempt to distract emergency services before carrying out the attack. Police allegedly seized several items from his bedroom, including a laptop, 2 mobile phones, a white t-shirt with the handwritten motive Natural Selection, and numerous notebooks containing drafts of his plan. The teenager faced the Adelaide Youth Court via video link from detention, charged with possessing an item with intent to kill or cause harm. With the court hearing, he would be assessed by a counter-terrorism team and psychiatrists. The magistrate said he was a serious risk to the community. He made no application for bail and will face court again in March.
Police say they're expecting to lay more charges when the teenager's electronic devices are analysed. After his arrest, they said there was no threat to the community. Claire Campbell, ABC News, Adelaide.
The World Health Organization has called for immediate action after more than 300 children died from toxic cough syrups last year. The medicines made in India and Indonesia contain high levels of ethylene glycol, which can be fatal even in small amounts. Prashant Reddy is the co-author of The Truth Pill, The Myth of Drug Regulation in India, and joins me now. Prashant, can you share with us exactly how widespread this toxic compound was?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have an accurate idea of how widespread this problem is. It usually occurs when the industrial solvents used by pharma companies to manufacture syrups contain certain traces of diethylene glycol or ethylene glycol. Now, in the case of India, the government of India hasn't been very transparent. It's not conducted a transparent investigation. So as a result, we just don't know how many companies in India have used the contaminated industrial solvent to manufacture cough syrups.
Are there still immediate concerns for consumers?
Absolutely, because depending on how many companies have used this contaminated solvent, it's very possible that the scale of the problem is actually much larger, which is why it's necessary for the WHO and the Indian government to conduct more transparent investigations so that we can identify all the pharma companies which have used the solvent in question.
How could this happen in the first place? Are there not enough adequate checks in place to ensure such mistakes don't happen?
Well, typically what happens is that companies buy these industrial solvents from normal chemical traders, and these chemical traders sell these solvents at different grades of purity. So for industrial use, there's one grade of purity. For pharmaceutical use, they're sold at a higher grade of purity. And at times there are mistakes made at the trader's end, but this issue of contamination of the DEG is very well known in the pharma industry, because of which the good manufacturing practices require pharma companies to test for contamination. When they fail to test for contamination is when we see such cases take place. Now in India, at least the company which was implicated in the Gambian incident, where 72 children died, had a terrible track record when it came to manufacturing quality medicine, and that was well known to Indian regulatory authorities. They just didn't take any action against the company. So it's a question of basically very poor regulation of the pharma industry in India.
Well, tell us a bit more about why India's drug manufacturers aren't being held to account for these deaths.
Well, the problem is, the government of India is very invested in seeing the Indian pharma industry grow. It's one of the few manufacturing success stories, and the government of India doesn't want to sully that image. So the typical reflexive bureaucratic reaction when there is a scandal is to try and deny it and try to cover it up, lest the world thinks that there is actually a quality problem with the Indian industry. So it's a very short-sighted, myopic approach to a very complicated problem.
Now, how often do we see such mass poisoning events due to contamination?
Well, they've been taking place in the developing world with a lot of frequency. The first mass poisoning incident took place in 1937 in the United States, and the US has never had a repetition of that. India has had 5 since 1970, between 1970 and 2020. Adding up these 2 incidents in Gambia and Uzbekistan, that goes up to 7 incidents. So this is a problem that's recurring in a country which likes to boast that it is the pharmacy of the world. And the fact that nobody is trying to solve the problem or tackle it seriously should be very concerning for the global community, which imports medicines from India in large volumes.
Well, the WHO is asking for member states to take immediate and coordinated action. So what else can be done to ensure this doesn't happen again?
Well, somebody needs to... I think the problem is in India, we're not going to see any change, because the Indian government has denied that the company which was implicated in the gambling incident actually did anything wrong, despite seeing the deaths of 72 children. So I don't see much changing within India at the behest of the Indian government. The international community needs to take steps, perhaps, on having an international regulatory framework to ensure that medicines traded between different countries are of a certain quality. Right now, there is absolutely no international regulatory framework ensuring the quality of drugs.
I mean, you've called for a centralised federal authority to govern drug manufacturing laws. Tell us more about what you propose.
Yeah, so India has one of the big problems in India is that we have a very fragmented system of regulation, wherein every state has its own regulator, plus the central or federal government has its own regulators. So we have a system of about 37 regulators, and that just causes a lot of turf wars and a lot of inefficiencies within the system. So there's been a long pending proposal in India to try and centralize these regulatory systems within one agency. But more important than centralization, I think, is the Indian system needs to be far more transparent. Right now, it's very difficult to figure out whether regulatory agencies are even doing their jobs. So I think more than centralization, we would really pitch for far greater transparency in how the entire regulatory system works.
Prashant Reddy, great to have this conversation. Thank you so much. Afghanistan is facing its coldest winter in a decade, with temperatures plunging to as low as minus 31 degrees Celsius and even colder in some mountainous areas where families are struggling to survive. The United Nations is warning that around 20 million people face acute hunger, with 2/3 of the population needing humanitarian assistance, including clean water and sanitation. Despite everything, the Taliban says it won't lift a ban on female aid workers.
A winter wonderland of aching beauty, but brutal. We're traveling through the massifs of the Hindu Kush, through the world's second highest road tunnel, the Salam Tunnel, a place of legend. It's an engineering wonder, but a death trap, especially in winter, in avalanches and accidents. The only highway rescue at this spot is Saki Mohammed, selling chains for tires in the coldest winter in a decade. Tough stuff in threadbare clothes.
It gets so cold, you can't see the road, you can't walk, and the heaters in cars don't work.
These are the lives people live here. It's so cold, but he said it's going to get colder still. We've been out just for minutes and my brows are frozen and my face feels it's going to fall off. Imagine if you live day in, day out in conditions like this.
This is the only way to reach Saki Mohammed's home. There's no road. Nothing is easy in this life.
This is what life is like here. Literally lived on the edge.
Even for the littlest, with little cover from this biting cold. A home made of mud, with the warmth of a large family.
I have heard people died of cold. My kids recently got sick. Some of my animals died. Till now, I haven't heard people died in Salang.
Even 5-year-old Jamshed helps keep them alive. He tells us how he has to carry water from the river, how his hands and feet burn in the cold, how he freezes in the wind and storms. They survive with a traditional stove and twigs. And the sandali, under this red and gold blanket, charcoal burns. You can taste the fumes in this room. This year, their heating costs soared, just like the rest of the world.
No aid agencies have come to help us, not under the last government or the Taliban government.
An aid agency did come by this month. This family wasn't seen as needy. Imagine the others. There's another hurdle this year. We went to see a Taliban minister to ask about a ban on Afghan women aid workers.
Men are already working with us in the rescue efforts, and there is no need for women to work with us.
The United Nations and the other aid agencies say that if Afghan women cannot work as part of the aid effort, they may need to stop their aid to Afghanistan that you desperately need.
This is an act of cruelty carried out by the United Nations, and it's unacceptable. In the UN, there is a law that says respect should be shown to all people in all religions. Our religion does not allow women to work in that way.
In Saki Mohammed's family, the oldest daughters didn't go to school. They couldn't afford it. 14-year-old Zainab was the luckiest. She got to go. Then the Taliban shut girls' high schools. Such hard lives in such harsh terrain. Afghan rulers come and go. Nature's power ever present.
New Zealand has sworn in its new Prime Minister, with Chris Hipkins officially taking the reins following the shock resignation of Jacinda Ardern. 44-year-old Mr. Hipkins and the new Deputy PM, Carmel Sepuloni, took their oaths of office during a ceremony in the capital, Wellington. The architects of New Zealand's pandemic response and now the country's 41st Prime Minister, Mr. Hipkins faces the task of reviving the ruling Labour Party's popularity ahead of the general election set for October. Eric?
Congratulations, Prime Minister Hipkins.
This is the biggest privilege and responsibility of my life. I'm energised and excited by the challenges that lie ahead.
Vanuatu's Prime Minister says the country is trying to fix corruption within its labour scheme. It saw dozens of seasonal workers sent to Australia on forged documents. Australia's Home Affairs Department says it's temporarily paused processing of Pacific labour mobility visas, and workers without valid authorisation could face deportation. Vanuatu police have made an arrest in relation to the forgeries. Media mogul Rupert Murdoch has scrapped a proposal to combine Fox with News Corp. It would have reunited a media empire he split nearly a decade ago. Prominent News Corp investors have been critical of the proposal. Now Mr. Murdoch has sent a letter saying he and his son Lachlan, who's the CEO of Fox Corp, decided the move is not optimal for shareholders. World number 5, Novak Djokovic will play unseeded American Tommy Paul in the Australian Open semi-finals after thrashing Russian Andrei Rublev in straight sets in their quarterfinal. Djokovic wasn't at his ruthless best in the opening exchanges, but still produced some brilliance to take the first set 6-1. The Serb's hamstring caused him some issues as the match unfolded, but he was able to adjust his game to take the second 6-2. Djokovic then eased through the third 6-4 to win a 25th straight match at Melbourne Park and close in on a 10th Australian Open title. Meantime, unheralded Polish player Magda Linette's dream run in the women's singles continues. The unseeded Linette beat former world number 1 Karolina Pliskova to advance to the semis and give Poland hope after top seed Iga Świątek was knocked out.
Tennis pundits expected a Polish woman to reach the Final Four, but it wasn't Magda Linette. The unseeded 30-year-old had never reached the Grand Slam semi-finals, and now her dream run continues after stunning the highly fancied Karolina Pliskova.
It's so emotional. I can't really believe it. It's really dreams come true.
Linette will next face Belarusian 5th seed Ariana Sabalenka, whose heavy hitting proved too much for Croatia's Donna Vekic.
Powers into the last 4.
In a battle of 2 unseeded Americans, Tommy Paul came out on top, although the performance of Ben Shelton will make fans excited. The 20-year-old college student will now resume his study at university next week. The Victoria Azarenka Renaissance has continued. The 33-year-old Belarusian shocked one of the tournament favourites.
Azarenka ripping up the form book and this women's draw.
American Jessica Pegula hadn't dropped a set in the opening 4 rounds, but last night went down in a straight sets upset. The last time Azarenka reached the Final 4 at Melbourne Park was a decade ago, when she went on to win her second straight title. Greek star Stefanos Tsitsipas is through to another Australian Open semi-final, but his campaign almost ended abruptly during a moment of frustration.
He swings at anger and it nearly hits the ball kids. You cannot do that.
Tsitsipas says the ball wasn't that close, but acknowledged he made a mistake. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
The Kookaburras have produced an inspiring comeback to beat Spain 4-3 in the quarterfinals of the Men's Hockey World Cup in India. The world's #1 Australians trailed Spain 2-0 just before half-time. They responded with 4 goals in 8 minutes, including a double from Jeremy Hayward to take control of the match. The Spaniards made it 4-3. They had a chance to level the score with 4 minutes left when they were awarded a penalty stroke for a stick check. The Hookers goalkeeper Andrew Charter stood tall. They'll face either England or Germany in the semi-finals.
Being 2 goals down makes it really hard for us, and to have that third quarter that really brought us back to the game, really tested our mettle, and we're proud to come away with the win.
The Melbourne Renegades have reached the finals of the BBL for the first time in 4 years, ending the Adelaide Strikers season. The Strikers needed to win in Melbourne last night to keep their finals hopes alive, but fell to the Renegades by 6 wickets, their 5th straight loss. Adelaide's batters failed to fire yet again, losing both openers early, including Travis Head for just 19 runs. Aaron Finch scored a half-century from home side. They did as proud of the World Cup, and many football faithful hoped the Socceroos' stellar performance in the Qatar would help grow the National Leagues back home. But an ABC analysis of A-League men's match attendances since the World Cup shows there's been less of a bump and more of a slump. Here's data analyst Casey Briggs.
Tens of thousands filling city squares, parks, stadiums, glued to a valiant Socceroos campaign, cheering them on for their best ever World Cup performance.
It's in for Australia! Craig Goodwin scores his second goal!
Many within the game hoped this was a chance to grow the local league.
Would this experience make you maybe want to go to an A-League game?
I think so, yes.
I really encourage those people who got behind the Socceroos to really come out and throw their support behind their local A-League side, because we've shown that there's quality in the A-League that can really match on the world stage.
Have people heeded that call? Data from the men's league suggests not. This is match attendance data from austadiums.com, showing the average number of game spectators in each round of the league's inaugural season and every season since. It's up and down, but usually within this range. Here is how this season of the men's A-League started. Round 6 saw strong attendance, and that is because of 2 key derby games that week. The World Cup followed that round, but since the league came back for round 7, it's had its worst 6 rounds for attendance this season. And aside from the first 2 pandemic-affected seasons, its worst rounds on record. That slump set in even before last month's pitch invasion in Melbourne. But that incident and the related sanctions on Melbourne Victory certainly haven't helped.
I hope that, and I do expect that Australians start respecting the quality of that.
Australian football will again be in the spotlight later this year when Australia hosts the Women's World Cup. Will the A-Leagues make the most of it? Casey Griggs, ABC News.
The World Rugby Sevens series returns to Australia this weekend for the first time in 3 years. It's the 5th stop of the season and comes after a pandemic-induced hiatus. Captains from the 28 men's and women's teams took part in a photo shoot ahead of the tournament, which kicks off on Friday. The Aussie men and women are the reigning series champions.
It hasn't been in Sydney for quite a while, so it's really exciting that we get to put ourselves in a position to win that tournament.
An extra little fight in the belly when they need to get off the ground. Playing in front of family and playing at home is pretty special.
Time for a check of the weather now. Here's Danny Tran.
There's a huge, massive cloud with embedded thunderstorms sitting over the Northern Territory and the Kimberley at the moment, and that's because of a tropical low sitting to the west of the Tiwi Islands. There's also a bit of cloud over inland Western Australia, which is extending to the southern coast because of a trough, and another trough extends from Central Australia into southwestern Queensland and northern New South Wales. On Thursday and Friday, a tropical low and a monsoon trough will keep up heavy rain and storms over the tropics, particularly over the top end in northern WA. Meanwhile, troughs and lows will bring showers and storms over the west, the Territory, Queensland, South Australia and New South Wales. Let's take a quick look around the country tomorrow. For Queensland, isolated showers and thunderstorms about the Gulf and Peninsula, as well as central and southern districts, cloudy in Brisbane. New South Wales and the capital, the chance of a shower or thunderstorm about the east and northern inland, cloudy in Canberra and Sydney. For Victoria tomorrow, isolated showers and thunderstorms about Gippsland and the eastern ranges in the afternoon and evening, cloudy in Melbourne. Showers about Tasmania's west and far south tomorrow, as well as about the northeast, cloudy in Hobart, mostly sunny in Launceston. Mainly dry tomorrow in South Australia, apart from the chance of a shower or thunderstorm in the far north, sunny in Adelaide. For the west, showers and gusty thunderstorms in the north, very hot through inland, central west and northern parts of the central wheat belt, sunny in Perth. And for the Territory, partly cloudy in the Simpson district, the chance of showers and thunderstorms elsewhere, showers with a possible storm in Darwin. On Friday, cloudy in Perth, Canberra and Hobart, sunny in Melbourne and Adelaide, showers in Sydney, possible showers in Brisbane, showers with a possible storm in Darwin.
Before we go recapping our top stories, the 2023 Australian of the Year, Taryn Brumfitt, has used her acceptance speech to urge adults to be better body image role models for Australian children. Germany has confirmed the country will send battle tanks to Ukraine, and the US is expected to follow with an official announcement soon. Berlin will also allow other nations to export the German-built Leopard 2 tanks. And vigils have been held to mourn the victims of the Monterey Park shooting in California, as the US President Joe Biden calls Congress to pass a bill for assault weapons to be banned. That's your word for tonight. You can always watch the show on iView, and more world news and interviews can be found at the ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Yvonne Young. Bye for now.
Can you give people some idea of what they can look forward to?
We're determined to do what we can to alleviate some of that pressure.
Have you confronted a double standard women have to be flawless and get ahead? I'm still very questioned.
How on earth does a little professor end up Southeast Asia's most notorious prison?
It moved me very deeply.
That is grief, and that is universal.
It's so important to keep celebrating diversity. We just have to be together.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
When big stories break.
Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died.
When change is made. They said people didn't know me, but I think they've got the name by now.
When we celebrate as a nation.
When you need us most. There's a sense of disbelief, really. It's devastating.
We tell you what's happening and why it matters. If you had one message to the Australian people, what would it be?
We're emergency, emergency.
We investigate and reveal important stories that the public has a right to know about.
Especially your kill will be killed.
No, I'm not. No, Cameron.
You know, how do we always tell people to look at us as like, they want kids up in the pen? What were they thinking?
This is live, like public.
Is anyone watching?
Hi, gorgeous thing. Look at that gorgeous dog.
was the 3 we were only gone for 2.5 hours. And